Think about this for a second. In 1985, the world had two, and only two, superpowers. But by the end of 1991, there was just one of the most powerful empires in modern history, a nation that shaped global politics for half a century, just poof, vanished from the map. So, how does that even happen? How does a superpower just disappear? It wasn't some foreign invasion. It wasn't a single catastrophic event. No, it was this incredible cascade of systemic failures, desperate reforms, and a sudden explosion of revolutionary spirit. And that is exactly what we are going to unpack. To really get this, you have to rewind the clock. We need to look at the state of the Soviet Union before those final chaotic years. Because the truth is, the cracks in the foundation had been there for a very, very long time. On the surface, right, the Soviet Union looked like an absolute behemoth. We're talking about a country that covered 1/6 of all the land on Earth. It was the world's biggest producer of oil, nickel, and lead, and it had the second largest military and economy on the planet. But behind that Iron Curtain, the reality for its people was, well, it was bleak. The economy had been slowly grinding to a halt since the 1960s. They were falling way behind the US in technology, and for so many, daily life was just defined by poverty and a feeling of decay. So you had all these pressures just building up, grinding away at the system. The centrally planned economy was a mess, famous for churning out terrible consumer goods that nobody wanted. At the same time, the government was pouring insane amounts of money into the military, trying to keep up with the US in the arms race, things like the Star Wars defense program. And they were also stuck in a draining, hopeless war in Afghanistan. It all led to what historians call a social malaise, where people just kind of gave up. All right, so the whole system is basically rotting from the inside out. It's a full-blown crisis, and it desperately needs a solution. And this is where Mikhail Gorbachev steps onto the world stage with a truly desperate gamble to try and fix it all. So in March 1985, Gorbachev takes the reins. And man, he is staring down the barrel of two massive, brutal problems. An economy that's in freefall, and an arch-rival in the United States that is just light years ahead in technology. He absolutely knew that doing nothing was not an option. Okay, so his first big idea was something called perestroika. It literally means restructuring. And this was his big plan to shock the dying Soviet economy back to life with a whole series of reforms. But here's the thing, it was a total flop. Why? Well, think about it. The very people who were supposed to implement the reforms, all these entrenched, corrupt officials in the Communist Party, they were the ones who were actually benefiting from the broken system. So, of course, they blocked any real change. Gorbachev realized he couldn't fix the economy until he first broke the party's stranglehold on, well, everything. And that realization led him to his second and much, much more radical policy. And this one was a game changer. It was called Glasnost, which means openness. Starting in 1986, the idea was to allow a level of transparency that was just unthinkable before. He actually encouraged regular citizens, writers, and intellectuals to speak up, to talk openly about the country's problems, hoping he could go around the corrupt party and find real answers. I mean, can you imagine the gamble? Using a little bit of freedom to try and save an authoritarian system. But as one historian so perfectly put it, he just didn't see that this new freedom of expression would boomerang right back and hit him and his whole reform program. He basically opened Pandora's box, and he had no idea what was about to come out. And let me tell you, this policy of openness didn't just create a little discussion. No, it unleashed an absolute torrent of anger and nationalism that had been brutally crushed and held down for decades. The dam was about to break. And things started to unravel fast. I mean, shockingly fast. Just weeks after Glasnost kicked off, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster happened. The government's clumsy attempt to cover it up got exposed, sparking absolute fury, especially in Ukraine. Then, fast forward to 1988, you get the first major nationalist uprising between Armenia and Azerbaijan. By 1989, it's a wildfire. Full-blown independence movements are gaining massive popular support all across the Soviet Union. You see, for the first time in forever, Glasnost gave a voice to the voiceless. You gotta remember, the Soviet Union wasn't really one country. It was an empire, held together by force, made up of over 100 distinct ethnic groups. And now, for the first time in decades, all these long-suppressed peoples could openly talk about who they were and demand their freedom. And a fire like that, it doesn't stay contained.
It jumped the borders and spread to the USSR's satellite states in Eastern Europe. And this is where the dominoes really started to fall.
Just look at how quickly it all came apart. In 1988, Moscow basically says, hey, we're not going to use force anymore to prop up your communist regimes. That was the signal. By 89, Poland and Hungary are on their way to democracy. Then, the moment nobody thought they'd ever see, November 1989, the Berlin Wall comes down. And by 1990, the Soviet republics themselves, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, are declaring full independence. It's all over.
And that's the great, unbelievable irony of this whole story, isn't it? The very medicine designed to reform and save the Soviet Union was the poison that triggered its complete and total collapse.
So, why? What really brought this giant to its knees? Let's do a quick autopsy on the collapse and see what we find. Most historians will tell you it boils down to three big things. First, you've got the economic argument. The system was a complete failure, couldn't provide for its people, and was being crushed by military spending. Then there's the ideological view, which basically says that people just stopped believing in the whole idea of communism. And finally, the nationalist argument, which we've talked about. Trying to keep a lid on over 100 different nationalities was a ticking time bomb that Glasnost finally set off. The final, fatal blow? That came in August of 1991. Some old-school communist hardliners, just horrified by all the chaos, tried to stage a coup to overthrow Gorbachev and turn back the clock. It failed, spectacularly, and in doing so, it destroyed whatever tiny bit of authority the central government had left. And that was pretty much it. A few months later, in December 1991, the Soviet Union was formally dissolved. After almost 70 years, it just ceased to exist. Gone. It really leaves us with this huge question, one that goes way beyond just this one story. What is the bigger risk? Is it trying to reform a system that is deeply, fundamentally broken, even if it means you might unleash forces you can't control? Or is it just doing nothing and watching it all rot from within?